Tuesday afternoon in San Francisco's financial district. Sunlight stretched through the towering glass panels of the Pacific Horizon Bank building. In the grand lobby, where gold-trimmed ceilings gleamed and marble floors shimmered underfoot, everything moved with a precision so polished it felt emotionless. Bank employees were dressed impeccably. Customers stepped through the revolving glass doors with a blend of haste and indifference. It was in this carefully choreographed setting that a woman appeared, silent but unmistakably present. She carried a luxurious leather briefcase, eyes calm, her face unreadable but marked with a quiet confidence earned through years of navigating the most unforgiving situations. No one knew who she was, and perhaps it was precisely that, the anonymity, that allowed the story to begin in such an unexpected way. Dr. Leona Grant, age 46, chairwoman and chief executive officer of Pacific Horizon Bank, arrived without an entourage, without the executive, only entrance. She came alone, dressed in a charcoal grey suit, low-heeled shoes, and no standout jewelry, save for a classic Patek Philippe watch. She didn't need to make an impression. For her, presence alone was enough. But clearly, that had never been enough for those who had yet to learn how to see beyond appearances. She walked directly toward the executive banking area, reserved for clients with accounts exceeding $500,000. But before she could say a word, a voice interrupted, clipped, dry, and heavy with assumption. "Ma'am, the general customer counter is over there," said Tiffany McGill, a young associate, without lifting her eyes for more than a second. Leona tilted her head slightly, her voice so soft it might have disappeared into the air if not for the firmness in her tone. "I need access to executive banking services." Tiffany raised an eyebrow, hesitated, and responded with thinly veiled irritation. "Do you have an appointment?" Leona replied simply, "No, I don't need one. I'm authorized to use this service." Nearby, Sarah Lynn, a senior media studies student, was working on her capstone project about service culture in major financial institutions. She had chosen Pacific Horizon for observation and had placed her phone angled on the table, live streaming out of academic habit. When the exchange between Leona and Tiffany began, something in Sarah's instinct kicked in. The tone, the glances, the veneer of professionalism that so often masked condescension. She unmuted her mic. 47 viewers. That number would not stay low for long. At that moment, a man emerged from the back office. Ethan Wallace, 36, assistant branch manager, walked with confidence and the kind of rehearsed smile that rarely questioned itself. The moment his eyes scanned Leona, it became clear an unspoken bias was running like code beneath that expensive suit. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice deliberately louder than necessary, as if he needed the entire lobby to hear his authority. "I'm simply requesting access to executive banking," Leona replied, her tone now not just calm but resonant, the kind of resonance found only in someone far too used to being questioned in the wrong ways. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" Ethan asked, quickly adding a clarification that no one had requested. "This service requires a minimum of $250,000 in assets, and we'll need to verify the legality of your income." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Instead, she placed her briefcase on the marble counter. The soft thud of leather meeting stone, no one knew it then, was the sound that would trigger a chain reaction, forcing this entire banking system to take a long, hard look at itself. And somewhere on Sarah's screen, the viewer count had just hit 127. The leather briefcase remained still on the counter, a quiet punctuation mark amid the rising tide of prejudice. Ethan glanced at it briefly, then returned his focus to Leona's face, as if her presence alone were a disruption to the orderly routine he had grown accustomed to controlling. "I'm not trying to be difficult," he said in a tone often mistaken for professionalism, "but this is a restricted area. If you don't meet the requirements, I'm afraid we won't be able to assist you." From a distance, Sarah Lynn adjusted her camera angle. Viewer count climbed to 207, then 238, as the first comments began to appear. "What's going on here? What kind of bank treats people like this?" Leona remained still, not angry, just tilting her head slightly, as if to quietly confirm that the words she had just heard were, in fact, spoken aloud. "Did you say you need to verify lawful income?" she asked again, each word clear but devoid of sharpness. Ethan didn't respond immediately. Behind him, a familiar figure emerged. Rachel Bloom, regional manager, 40, 2 years old, known for her sharpness and often praised for her crisis management skills. But today, her gaze wasn't focused on finding solutions. It was fixed on maintaining control. "Is there a problem here?" Rachel asked, her eyes landing quickly on Leona. Ethan jumped in, explaining, "This customer is requesting executive services, but hasn't provided the necessary documentation. I'm just trying to explain the procedure." Rachel nodded slowly, as if she had heard enough, then turned to Leona. "I hope you understand that we are required to follow strict guidelines for verifying identity and financial sources, especially in cases that are not yet clear." A moment of silence followed. Those words needed no further explanation, because they had already said more than enough. Sarah Lynn sat frozen, her hand still holding the camera, her eyes fixed on the woman being questioned like a stranger in a place she had helped build. Leona opened her bag and took out her wallet. From between the folds of soft leather, a flash of platinum caught the light, an American Express Centurion card. Then she selected her driver's license and placed it gently on the marble counter. "This is my identification," she said. Rachel glanced at it, barely reading, then shook her head. "We still need further confirmation, assets, income, and the purpose of the transaction. This is internal postal policy." A parking ticket peeked out from Leona's briefcase, silver and blue, marked for VIP basement level P1, reserved only for members of the board of directors. But no one was looking. No one noticed. Because no one truly wanted to see. And elsewhere, Sarah Lynn whispered into her mic, "I think we're witnessing something very wrong." The parking ticket rested carelessly along the edge of the briefcase, a detail that, with the slightest discernment, should have been enough to awaken awareness. But Rachel's expression remained unchanged, and Ethan was too busy displaying a hollow authority he still believed to be unshakable. "We need to verify lawful income," Ethan repeated, this time slower, as if lecturing a student who had failed to grasp the lesson. Leona nodded slightly, maintaining a composure that was nothing short of remarkable. "Then I suggest you clearly list each requirement, so I can prepare accordingly. We need your payroll records, at least 6 months of bank statements, partner contracts, and an income verification from your governing body," Ethan stated, unaware that every word he spoke was being live-streamed to over 500 viewers through Sarah Lynn's channel, where the comment section was now flooded. "Who is she for them to treat her like this? Did anyone else catch that platinum card? From the back, an elderly customer stood up. It was Margaret Elwood, 76 years old, a long-time VIP client of the branch and a former economics professor at UC Berkeley. "I think you should check your records," she said, her voice not loud but commanding enough to draw attention across the lobby. Ethan glanced at Margaret, momentarily unsettled, then turned away again. He was playing a game of pride before an invisible audience, and losing without realizing it. Rachel tried to maintain her calm demeanor, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of concern. She stepped closer to Leona, and for the first time, lowered her voice. "We truly mean no offense, but this is a required protocol." Leona did not respond immediately. She pulled out her phone and glanced at the screen. 5 missed calls from the executive office, 2 messages from legal counsel, and 1 flagged meeting alert. She looked up. "I understand. So if you are following protocol, perhaps it's also time to review when that protocol was written, and for whom." Just then, the transaction screen behind the counter lit up with the face of Vincent Myers, the regional director dialing in from the 32nd floor. "What is going on down there?" he asked sharply. Rachel straightened at once. "A customer is attempting to access executive services, but is refusing to provide the necessary documentation." Leona turned to the screen, her gaze direct. "I'm refusing to cooperate, or are you evaluating me based on something not found in your operations manual?" She did not wait for a reply. Instead, she unlocked her phone, entered an internal access code, and typed a single line. Code 9. Immediate escalation. Take action now. Everything was only just beginning. And this time, no one could pretend they had not seen. 2:58 p.m. The atmosphere in the main lobby of Pacific Horizon Bank suddenly thickened. The faint clicking of keyboards and the distant hum of printers were swallowed by a tense silence. The viewer count on Sarah Lynn's live stream surpassed 1,200, and the comments had shifted from confusion to fury and disbelief. What are they doing? This is clearly discrimination. This bank needs to be exposed. People waiting in line began to pause, some pulling out their phones to record. What started as a personal transaction had now become a public spectacle. Leona stood her ground, the briefcase still in hand. She looked at Ethan. "Do you know what it says on page 50 part 2, section 4.1 of your employee handbook?" Ethan blinked. "I don't. It states that all customers are to be treated fairly, regardless of race, or gender, or appearance," she said firmly. Her voice was not raised, yet each word seemed etched into the cold stone of the room. Ethan turned away, trying to maintain his composure, but it was clear he had lost control of the situation. At that moment, a man in a dark suit with a security badge on his shoulder walked steadily forward. Leon Trammell, the branch's chief of security, who had served the bank for 19 years. He stopped in front of Leona, showing no threat, only calm authority. "Ma'am," he asked gently, "is there anything I can assist you with?" Before Leona could reply, Vincent Myers' voice barked from the screen above. "If the customer cannot present a valid reason for being there, security is to escort her off the premises." Rachel inhaled, preparing to issue the order. But before she could speak, Mrs. Elwood stepped forward from the far corner. "What exactly are you doing? Removing a woman simply because she's asking for a service she is entitled to?" Her voice, though aged, rang with the weight of 4 decades watching progress unfold, and now decay creeping back in. Sarah Lynn whispered into her mic, "We're witnessing an earthquake." Leon didn't have time to respond before the radio on his belt crackled to life. A voice came through, calm and commanding. "This is Amelia Rhodes, head of the executive office, confirming Ms. Leona Grant is present in the main lobby. Emergency directive. All staff are to stand down. Await further instructions." Leon lifted the device, his eyes locking onto the woman in front of him for the first time with clarity. This time, his gaze held no doubt, only recognition. Meanwhile, Ethan was still counting. 3, 2, and Leona, eyes never leaving his, slowly placed her hand on the tablet she had just unlocked. The screen lit up, displaying the Pacific Horizon Bank logo. Executive Access, Leona Grant, CEO. Everything stopped. The tablet in Leona's hand glowed, its metallic surface catching the reflection of the chandelier above. On the screen, the internal interface clearly displayed the words, Executive Dashboard, Pacific Horizon Bank, Authenticated, CEO, Leona Grant. Real, time data maps, executive meeting schedules, compliance alerts, and financial charts were neatly arranged like a battlefield, known only to those who understood the weight behind each number. Ethan Mitchell stepped back. The air in the lobby seemed to tilt. A wave of dizziness swept across his face, like a man who had just stepped off what he thought was a solid bridge, only to find empty air beneath. "Whoa, what is this?" he stammered, eyes still locked on the screen. Sarah Lynn swung the camera lens toward Leona, her hands trembling slightly from adrenaline. Her live stream crossed 4,100 viewers, comments streaming like a storm. "She's the CEO. They just humiliated their own boss at the counter." "We're watching history happen." Patricia Bloom turned pale. In that moment, everything she once believed she could control suddenly felt meaningless, because the woman she had refused to verify was not only a powerful client, but the very leader under whom the entire organization operated. At precisely 3:18 p.m., 3 figures in dark business attire stepped through the main entrance, quiet, deliberate, with no need for introduction. Leading them was Amelia Rhodes, Chief of Staff, followed by General Counsel Martin D'Souza and Compliance Director Eleanor Weiss. None of them spoke right away. They didn't have to. Their very presence turned the lobby into a courtroom without a verdict, yet full of judgment. Leon Trammell, head of security, gave a slight nod to Amelia, his eyes never leaving Leona. "Confirmed. She is present. I have suspended all actions per command." Amelia nodded. "Maintain order. No further moves unless directed by the executive office." Rachel Bloom opened her mouth as if to speak, but fell silent when Martin D'Souza's gaze met hers, not cold, but heavy with legal weight. Ethan was still caught mid-count, trapped in some invisible stopwatch ticking inside his mind. 1. "Mr. Mitchell," Leona said, her voice calm but firm enough to make everything stop. "I think you should take a closer look at this screen." There were no doubts left. That screen was no longer just a display. It was a living indictment. Every item on it cut through the illusion of power held by those below the top floor. As Leona lifted her eyes from the screen, her gaze met the hollow stare of Ethan Mitchell. There was no longer a trace of confidence in his pupils, only the dawning realization that he had just destroyed his own illusion of control. On the video call, Vincent Meyer's face still filled the large screen behind the counter, but his expression had changed completely. His forehead glistened with sweat, his eyes darted with uncertainty, and his voice had lost its usual steadiness. "It seems we may have encountered a serious misunderstanding." Leona remained composed. "The issue is not a misunderstanding, Mr. Myers. It is an assumption, and that assumption was passed from a manager's mouth to an employee's actions, and even reached the decisions of the security team, without anyone stopping to ask, 'Is this right?'" Her voice rang clear. No need to raise it, because the weight lay in every carefully chosen word. Amelia Rhodes stepped slowly beside Leona and handed her a file. Inside were excerpts from security footage, a list of personnel present, internal communication logs, and copies of 3 pending legal complaints related to discrimination. You planned this in advance?" Rachel asked, her voice trembling, uncertain whether it was from fear or anger. "No," Leona replied, eyes still fixed on Ethan. "I placed my trust in this institution's ability to listen to its customers. But today, it appears that trust has been tested." By now, Mrs. Elwood was standing beside Leona, her hand gently resting on hers in tolerant support. On Sura Lynn's live stream, viewership peaked at 5,000. A user had just shared the link on Twitter with the caption, "They're kicking out their own CEO. Unbelievable." Leon Trammell's voice came through the internal headset. "Code 1. Temporarily suspend all VIP recognition systems. Await directives from the executive office." The internal network began to stir. From the 47th floor, departments were receiving new urgent instructions. The bank system was no longer just processing transactions. It was bracing to manage a full-scale crisis of trust. Ethan still hadn't spoken, but his eyes had drifted. He was no longer counting, because the final second of false power had long since passed. 3:25 p.m. The main lobby of Pacific Horizon Bank seemed to be holding its breath. No one moved. No one spoke. They stood still as witnesses to a moment no history book could have predicted, when an institution, confident in its 75-year legacy, revealed a crack that ran all the way to its foundation in less than an hour. Leona gently opened her leather case. Inside, everything was arranged with such precision that even the military might struggle to find fault. A board meeting invitation, regulatory compliance reports, a community credit allocation plan, regional director KPI tracking sheets, and a lanyard bearing the title Dr. Leona Grant, Chief Executive Officer. She clipped the badge onto her lapel. Beneath the chandelier light, the bank's logo shimmered as if it had just been etched into the air. At the same moment, Sarah Lynn updated the viewer count. 6,892. The comments flared up. She really is the CEO. This needs to make national news. They're not surviving this. Bradley Mitchell looked like a man waking from a trance. His mouth hung open, eyes fixed on the name badge, as if he could not comprehend that everything which had just occurred was real. This can't be. CEOs don't walk in alone. No assistant, no entourage. That's impossible. Impossible for whom? Leona asked softly, though the steel beneath her silk voice had become unmistakable. Behind her, Amelia Rhodes answered a call from the 47th floor. She listened for a few seconds, then nodded. "The board meeting begins at 4 p.m. We need all involved parties present." Leon Trammell turned to Ethan Mitchell and Rachel Bloom. "New directive from the executive office. You are both requested to accompany us to the executive floor meeting room. Immediately." Ethan could not move. His legs were like stone. Rachel could not speak. Her lips trembled with justifications that never formed. And Mrs. Elwood, who had remained quiet for a long while, stepped forward. Her eyes met Ethan's, filled more with sorrow than anger. "You had the chance to serve someone extraordinary, but you chose to judge her through the eyes of a gatekeeper, not with the heart of someone who serves." Leona looked across the room, not with fury, not with grandeur, but with the calm of someone who knew that the greatest battle of her life was only just beginning. 4:00 p.m. The 47th floor of Pacific Horizon Bank headquarters, once a place reserved for meetings filled with profit charts and growth strategies, had now become the center of crisis management, carrying a weight that could not be measured in numbers. Inside the main conference room, a long walnut table gleamed under recessed lights, every seat taken. 12 members of the board of directors, familiar faces in Chicago's financial circles, sat in silence, each with a folder Amelia Rhodes had just distributed. The legal assistant and head of human resources occupied side chairs, their eyes scanning through marked violations on briefing tabs. Leona Grant entered. Her gaze was steady and unflinching. She was no longer the woman misjudged at the front desk. She was the leader, the one responsible, the one reshaping an institution, trembling under the weight of its own misplaced pride. Following her were Ethan Mitchell and Rachel Bloom, their faces pale, stripped of the residual arrogance of outdated authority. Each step they took brought them closer to the verdict they once believed they would never face. David Alcott, chairman of the board, 68 years old, a man who had steered the bank through multiple financial storms, tapped the gavel lightly. "This emergency session is now in order." Leona connected her computer to the large display. The data unfolded layer by layer: live stream viewership graphs, Twitter and Facebook shares, video re-upload statistics on YouTube, engagement rates. And then, what made the room feel like lead: security footage, recorded dialogue, the way clients were rejected, questioned, treated like threats simply because they did not look like what the bank deemed acceptable. No one said a word. When the footage ended, the room remained silent for a full 30 seconds. Robert Chen, the board's compliance officer, exhaled sharply, paled. "Dear God, this isn't just an oversight. This is a cultural defect." Maria Solano, legal counsel, began outlining the fallout. Violations of the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, the Fair Housing Act, class action lawsuit risks, potential FDIC downgrade, stock price volatility. The number $50 million in possible damages landed like a ticking bomb. Leona did not rush to a conclusion. She simply turned to the final slide. "We have 3 options. 1, cover it up and endure the long-term consequences. 2, patch the surface to appease public opinion. 3, restructure from the roots. Expensive, difficult, but worthy of the 75 years of legacy we claim to stand on." The eyes of the board members began to shift. It was no longer fear they carried. It was realization that this moment, this decision, would shape the next half-century of the legacy they were entrusted to build. Inside the oak, panelled room thick with the scent of power, no one doubted that what had just unfolded was an irreversible turning point. When Leona presented the three options, she did not impose, did not condemn. She simply laid every truth bare on the table, leaving each person to reflect through the lens of their own professional conscience. But for those accustomed to making decisions based on figures and reports, today, the gaze of a woman humiliated within her own organization became the only metric that truly mattered. Jennifer Walsh, head of internal audit, turned to Bradley Mitchell. "Mr. Mitchell, can you explain your actions?" Her voice was not raised, but each word cut clean like a blade. Bradley stood up, trembling. "I thought I was just following risk control protocols. I was trained to identify suspicious indicators." "And what exactly was suspicious here?" Jennifer followed up. "The customer's skin color? The fact that she didn't arrive with a secretary? Or was it the platinum card that made you feel threatened?" Bradley did not answer, because no answer could salvage the crumbling image of himself in that moment. Maria Solano held up a statistical report. The average service time between white and non-white clients, the frequency of additional documentation requests, the number of times security was called, all exposing a system of discrimination not written into policy, but ingrained in habit. Patricia Bloom, once seen as the cornerstone of the central branch, tried to interject. "We were just trying to protect the bank. Fraud these days is very sophisticated." "And in your 12 years here," Maria interrupted, "have you ever asked a white client to prove their legal source of income before serving them?" There was no answer, only a choked "chi" caught in Patricia's throat. James Dwyer, head of compliance, slid an iPad toward Leona. "In the past 6 months, complaints of discrimination have risen by 47%. We currently face 3 pending lawsuits totaling over $2.3 million in claims. And according to the FDIC, we are under review for our Community Reinvestment Act rating." Leona gave a subtle nod. She wasn't surprised. She had prepared for this, but hearing her colleagues confirm it aloud made the air feel even heavier. Finally, Chairman David Olcott looked around the table. "The question is no longer about who was wrong. It's whether we have the courage to make it right." He paused, then turned to Leona. "Dr. Grant, what is your recommendation?" Leona looked each person in the eye. Her voice did not waver, but it carried the restraint of someone who had endured and who still hoped. "I recommend the third option, full reform. We become a model in the financial industry for fairness, transparency, and moral courage, or we accept that discrimination is part of our business model." There was no debate. 12 votes, unanimous. At 5:23 p.m., Bradley Mitchell's career officially ended. Patricia Bloom and Vincent Myers followed shortly after. But Leona knew those 3 names were not the issue. The real issue was ensuring that this institution would never again need a moment like today's to relearn how to treat people. At 8 a.m. the next morning, the headquarters of Pacific Horizon Bank, once the epicenter of a crisis of trust, now radiated a renewed sense of purpose. The preferred client signs had been replaced with new banners that emphasized respect, equity, service without bias. In the grand lobby, a newly formed team dressed in refined Navy uniforms wore name tags reading Client Experience Guardians, quietly observing and recording every interaction. not for control, but to uphold a simple promise. Every customer deserves to be heard, even if no one knows who they are. Margaret Foster, Director of Human Resources, stood before more than 100 employees to announce a 40-hour implicit bias training program for the entire organization. "This is not punishment," she said. "It is a path to maturity. We are not changing to pacify public opinion. We are changing because doing the right thing must begin within." The Horizon Equity app launched at midnight, enabling customers and employees to anonymously report discrimination directly to the CEO's office. Every report came with a guaranteed response time of under 24 hours, an unprecedented move in the industry. Sarah Chin, who live-streamed the fateful afternoon the day before, returned as an honorary guest. Speaking to Channel 7 News, she said, "What impressed me wasn't that the CEO experienced discrimination, but that she turned that pain into a force for reform." The Community Investment Fund, initiated by Leona, originally set at $500,000, had surpassed $1.2 million thanks to voluntary contributions from board members themselves. Interest, free loans were disbursed to minority-owned businesses, and free financial education centers were established in the South Side district. Mrs. Ellsworth, the elderly woman who had intervened during the incident, now sat beside Leona in the VIP lounge. "In my 40 years with this bank," she said, "I've never seen a transformation this swift and this sincere." But the numbers spoke, too. The average service time across racial groups had equalized to 5.1 minutes. The rate of additional documentation requests dropped by 73%. Customer satisfaction scores rose by 89%. Internal staff trust ratings in the organization increased by 45% in just 1 week. As for Bradley Mitchell, the night after his dismissal, he received an unexpected call from the CEO's office. Ellen, Leona's assistant, made it clear. Dr. Grant does not punish. She offers the chance for transformation. A 6-month diversity training program was proposed, along with required volunteer work and the opportunity to re-enter the industry if successfully completed. Bradley agreed. His first assignment was teaching financial literacy to teens at a church on the city's south side, where no one asked about his past, only whether he was truly listening to them. 6 months later, at the National Financial Leadership Conference in Miami, Leona stood before more than 3,000 banking executives from across the country to deliver a keynote titled "From Crisis to Culture: Leading Change in Real Time." Her story had become required reading at Harvard, a training model for the FDIC, and a new benchmark for the financial industry. But to Leona, the most valuable part was not the accolades or the speech. It was what she witnessed each morning, when an unknown customer walked through the bank's doors and was greeted as a human being. No title required, no name tag needed. Only dignity. The story of Leona Grant is not merely a confrontation between leadership and discrimination. It is proof that courage, when paired with intellect and unwavering resolve, can reshape an entire institution. In a world where bias is sometimes so subtle it becomes an invisible norm, Leona's actions serve as a reminder that corporate culture is not measured by slogans, but by how it treats the most vulnerable, or even when no one is watching. If you believe that every customer, no matter who they are, deserves respect, then like this video to help spread that value. And do not forget to subscribe so you can continue following real stories where justice does not have to scream to be heard. Have you ever witnessed or experienced a similar injustice? Leave a comment with 3 simple words: deserve much more.